Imagine growing up with the sound of ice cream trucks mixed with police helicopters, where kids learned which streets were safe before they learned multiplication, and where a single color of clothing could decide whether you made it home alive. In the 1980s and 90s, Los Angeles became the global symbol of gang culture, a city of palm trees and movie stars, but also a city divided by invisible borders, ruled by crews, cliques, and codes that outsiders never saw, but residents lived with every single day. In this video, we're going deep into that era. Not just the headlines, not just the crime statistics, but the people, the neighborhoods, the forces that built the streets, and how a generation got caught in the middle of something much bigger than themselves. This is the story of Los Angeles gangs in the 80s and 90s, how it exploded, why it lasted, and what it cost. To understand the gangs of that era, you have to rewind to decades earlier. After World War II, Los Angeles was booming. Factories were hiring, suburbs were expanding. But opportunity didn't reach everyone equally. Redlining kept many Black and Latino families locked into specific neighborhoods. Housing discrimination made it nearly impossible to move out. At the same time, schools were underfunded, jobs disappeared as factories left the city, and police relationships with communities grew more hostile. Young people felt trapped. By the late 60s and 70s, street groups had already formed for protection and identity. But in many cases, they weren't yet heavily involved in major organized crime. They were more about territory, loyalty, and survival. Then the 1980s hit, and everything changed. The introduction of crack cocaine into Los Angeles was like pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. Crack was cheap, fast, and incredibly addictive. And for young men with few job prospects, it became the fastest way to make serious money. Suddenly, gangs weren't just fighting over respect, they were fighting over drug corners worth thousands of dollars a day. Weapons got bigger, conflicts got deadlier, and violence became more organized. Drive-bys became a terrifying norm. Entire neighborhoods went quiet at night, not because they were peaceful, but because people were hiding indoors. Some areas saw murder rates that rivaled war zones. And here's the part that often gets missed. Many of these teenagers weren't trying to become criminals. They were trying to survive in an economy that gave them no legal options. No conversation about LA gangs is complete without talking about the Crips and the Bloods. The Crips formed first in the late 60s, originally as loosely connected neighborhood groups. Over time, different Crip sets spread across South Central. Then came the Bloods, created largely as protection against Crip aggression. What made this rivalry so intense was that it wasn't two unified organizations. It was hundreds of small sets, all flying the same colors but often acting independently. One shooting could trigger months of retaliation, and because the sets were so local, the conflicts were incredibly personal. You weren't fighting strangers, you were fighting people you went to school with. Entire families were divided by affiliations. And during the 80s and 90s, this rivalry dominated the streets. But they weren't the only ones. While the media focused heavily on Bloods and Crips, Latino gangs were also deeply entrenched across East and South Los Angeles. These gangs often had roots going back generations. Neighborhood loyalty was everything. Territory was defended block by block. Graffiti wasn't just vandalism, it was a declaration of war. Some conflicts lasted decades, passed down from older members to younger ones. Prison also played a huge role. Once inside prisons and jails, street gangs became connected to larger prison organizations, which then influenced behavior back on the streets. This created a cycle where street beef led to prison alliances, which then fueled even more street violence. And again, many members were recruited extremely young. Middle school young, sometimes younger. As violence surged, law enforcement responded aggressively. Special units, mass sweeps, gang databases. Entire neighborhoods felt like occupied zones. But heavy policing also created deep resentment. Many residents felt targeted just for where they lived or how they dressed. Trust between communities and police collapsed. And then came 1992, the Rodney King verdict. When officers were acquitted after being filmed beating a black man, the city exploded. For days, Los Angeles burned. Gangs temporarily called truces, not to protect the city, but because anger had shifted towards something bigger than neighborhood rivalries. The riots showed the world how deep the frustration really went. And after the fires went out, nothing was magically fixed. At the same time the streets were exploding, another powerful force was rising: West Coast hip-hop. Artists from gang-affected neighborhoods were finally telling their own stories. But media often focused only on the violence, not the poverty, trauma, or lack of opportunity behind it. Gang culture became entertainment. Movies, music videos, fashion. For some kids, the gang image became just as powerful as the reality. But real life didn't come with record deals or movie endings. It came with funerals, prison sentences, and cycles that were incredibly hard to break. By the late 90s and early 2000s, gang violence in Los Angeles began to decline. Not disappear, but decline. Several factors played a role. Crack markets collapsed. More community programs emerged. Former gang members started intervention groups. And incarceration had already removed many from the streets, for better or worse. But another quiet change was happening at the same time. Black gangs, Latino gangs, and, to a lesser extent, Asian gangs began to experience a gradual decline, alongside an overall reduction in crime rates. Coinciding with the rise of internet boom, people simply started spending more time at home. The internet turned houses into entertainment centers, social hubs, and even workplaces. Instead of gathering on street corners or hanging out late outside, more people are logging in, streaming, gaming, and scrolling from their rooms. The internet also changed how conflicts play out. Arguments that once might have turned physical can now stay online, turning into posts, comments, and digital beefs instead of real-world confrontations. While online drama can still be intense, it often ends with blocks and bans instead of police reports and hospital visits. This doesn't mean the internet solved crime, but it may have quietly reduced opportunities for it. When fewer people are outside late at night, fewer chance encounters happen, fewer rival groups cross paths, and fewer risky situations begin. In that way, staying connected online may have helped make streets calmer, not by changing human nature, but by changing where people spend their time. But the scars remain. Families still live with losses from that era. Entire communities still deal with the aftermath. And many former members say the same thing today. They weren't chasing power. They were chasing safety, identity, and survival. When people talk about gangs, they often talk about numbers. How many arrests? How many shootings? How many bodies? But behind every statistic was a kid who grew up too fast, a mother who waited up at night, a neighborhood that deserved better options. The gangs of 80s and 90s Los Angeles weren't born from nowhere. They were shaped by economics, segregation, policy, and neglect. Understanding that doesn't excuse the violence, but it explains why it became so powerful and so widespread. And maybe the most important lesson of that era is this: when entire communities are left without opportunity, something will fill that vacuum. Sometimes it's not something you want. Today, Los Angeles is a city of diversity and constant reinvention. It remains a global powerhouse for entertainment, culture, and technology, while also facing serious challenges like housing costs, traffic, and economic inequality. Many neighborhoods that once struggled with high crime and constant gang activity have seen major improvements, with gang violence significantly lower than in the 80s and 90s era. LA is also one of the most diverse cities in the world, where numerous cultures, languages, and communities shape daily life, food, music, and art. More than anything, today's Los Angeles is a city still evolving, balancing opportunity and struggle, glamour and grit, vice and virtue, all at the same time. If you want more deep dive stories like this, stories that go beyond the headlines and into the human truth, Make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with what topic we should cover next. Because history doesn't just live in books. Sometimes it lives on the very streets we drive past every day. And to that, I'll see you next time.